Hello, I'm Julian Whittle from Cumbria Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here with Maria Ramsdale, an investment executive with FW Capital, to talk about the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund. Maria, tell me about the fund. What is it? What does it do? And who is it designed to help?
Okay, so the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund is designed to help growing businesses across the northwest that covers most of the Northern Powerhouse region. And basically it's all the LEPs that have got together apart from Newcastle, so 10 out of the 11 LEPs have decided to put money into a fund which is backed by European money and also money from the British Business Bank, and it's designed at helping growing businesses.
Right, now as I understand it, there are three aspects to the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund. Firstly, there's what they call microfinance, which is defined as loans from £25,000 up to £100,000. Then there's debt finance, which again is loans from £100,000 up to £750,000. And finally, there's equity finance, which can be anything from £50,000 up to £2 million. And that's where the owner's actually selling a stake in their business, a bit like on Dragon's Den, which obviously to raise capital. Now, you're involved with the second one of these, the debt finance element, which, just to recap, is loans from £100,000 up to £750,000. Tell me about your role and how you work with businesses.
Okay, so what happens is when I get a referral in, I will go and work with the business to see what their growth aspirations are, what they're wanting to achieve, and more importantly, what the purpose of the funding is for, so that I can find out whether it sort of fits what we're looking to and how we can support them. But it's a case of obviously going out, visiting the business, seeing them in the premises, getting an idea of the financial information, what their plans are for the future, sort of to gain an idea of whether the fund fits what they're looking for.
Right, okay. Now, sort of to clarify really, is the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund open to any SME in Cumbria? Or are there certain sectors or types of business that are excluded? I suppose in short, is there a catch?
There's no catch to the fund. What I would say is that the businesses that we can invest in, it is a European-backed fund, so therefore that comes with certain restrictions. And with the restrictions, we don't unfortunately invest in retail or sort of B2C, so in anything sort of restaurants, hotels. So unfortunately we don't invest in that sector, and we don't invest in agriculture, which is obviously an important sector for Cumbria.
And nuclear is another, isn't it? Which is excluded.
Okay, so nuclear businesses are excluded. However, if you have a nuclear business that might be looking at diversifying in, say, to oil and gas, and the purpose of the funding was purely for that, then we could look at that for them. So that's why we don't like to be too broad and say no to anybody. We like to look at what actually the business is doing, what sector they're in now, and what sector they're looking for growth in. And
is it similar with, because farming you can't lend to, but there might be some certain circumstances when you could.
So we can't lend direct to farmers if it's for their main production. However, if, for example, you have a very successful farmer that also produces cheese on a business-to-business basis, or a successful farmer, for example, that may be doing agricultural contracting, then if they're run separately, say in a limited company outside of the farming accounts, then yes, we can definitely look to support that growth.
So it's not black and white, so it's definitely worth checking. Are there any restrictions on what the money can be used for?
Yeah, the money primarily is for growth of the business. So what we're really looking at is to see that growth story, and the investment is to be used maybe for working capital, or we call it growth capital, or possibly creating jobs. If the growth is also looking maybe staffing, marketing, anything like that, as long as it is for actual business growth. You know, it might be that it's fulfilling an order that they've got. So, for example, a new contract where there's definitely a need to spend some money to get that contract, and that's definitely the sort of business we want to work with.
Okay. So are there any exclusions? So, for example, they couldn't use the money to repay other debts, for example, could they?
We can't do refinance of the business, and we can't do it where it's a cash in or cash out element. And what we mean by that is if you've got a management buyout, our funds can't be used to fund that, However, if the main company's funds are being used for the buyout, but they then need some money to grow, then we can satisfy that the money's for growth. So what I would say is, in any eventuality, it's best to have a chat, because sometimes it's not always clear what the funds are being used for. So that the sooner we meet the business and decide whether it's eligible or not, they will be aware of that.
Now, do SMEs have to exhaust other routes before the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund will lend? I mean, is it just for businesses that have been turned down by the banks, a sort of lender of last resort?
It's not a lender of last resort, because a lot of the businesses that are coming to us have excellent growth plans. The reason that they're not getting their bank finance is possibly due to lack of security. So you're quite right in saying that they have to have been declined by their main high street lender or their bank,
right?
Because they've got to go to there, because that's the first source of funding. But a lot of reasons that that's been declined is purely on a security basis and not the strength of the business. So we're definitely not a lender of last resort. I would say we're a second tier lender, where we're looking to support businesses that are growing.
I mean, that's something that came out of our consultation that we did last year. It was actually on the government's industrial strategy, but businesses told us that quite often banks on smaller loans won't really do due diligence on the business case because it isn't worth their while. The loan isn't big enough, there's not enough margin. So that what they'll just do is ask, is there security? And if there is, they'll lend, and if there isn't, they won't. So you do have businesses with really good growth prospects and a really good business plan who get turned down just because there isn't security there for them. Is the process of applying, is it long drawn out? How quickly can you arrange finance?
Okay, so to put it in real terms, it's very much the information we get from a business. So if a business comes to me and they have all their information, then the turnaround can be quite quick. So for example, I'm working with a business at the moment, and obviously we're in the first week of August, sort of the middle to end of July we got the full information, and we will look to get them an answer hopefully by the end of this week, and they should be able to complete in a couple of weeks' time. But that business has spent a lot of their preparation time in making sure that the management information is correct, that we've got copies of their last accounts, their business plan, it's robust, they've gone through all their due diligence, and they've spent a lot of time in the preparation, so therefore the turnaround is quick. Where the turnaround is longer is generally where a business just comes along and says, we'd like to borrow some money, and they don't actually have anything to substantiate why they need the money or the financial information behind it. So it's very much up to the customer, and this is where we work very closely with the Growth Hub, in that if we get a client who hasn't quite experienced the idea of raising finance and therefore doesn't realise the requirements, then we can work with the Growth Hub to get some support on that business planning and looking at how they put their cash flows together, etc. Okay.
What about a business with a poor credit history? Are they eligible or are they ruled out?
No, we don't rule anybody out on a poor credit history, because there might be, extenuating circumstances what happened. What we would do is we take it all into reflection of the part of the credit that we're looking at. So we definitely won't say no, but what we will do is we will do the due diligence to understand why that position happened. Obviously, if it's been through no fault of their own and there's reasons that were extenuating circumstances, we'll take that into consideration. But that is just a minor part of the credit paper, so it would be taken into consideration.
Now, if for whatever reason a business doesn't meet the criteria for the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, is that the end of the story? Or can you direct them to other sources of finance?
No, because my background is raising finance and raising finance with a multitude of different providers, then if I've seen a business and I've looked at it and thought, well, that's a great business, it's got the opportunity to grow, it can prove it, however our product doesn't fit for whatever reason, then I've got a plethora of different finance people that I can refer them over to.
Oh, good.
And I would make an introduction for the business.
Right, oh, that's well worth knowing then. So I mean, I've noticed that businesses increasingly are actually looking beyond what you call conventional lenders, their banks and so on. I mean, I wondered what your views were on P2P lenders such as Funding Circle. Have you come across businesses that have used crowdfunding?
Yeah, I have. As I mentioned before, my previous role, I worked in the access to finance team, so we did a range of different products, and myself, I've actually assisted businesses in raising finance through peer-to-peers. What I would say is the change in the market, obviously since the 2008 financial crisis, has meant that the peer-to-peer lenders have obviously come on board. There is a positive and a negative to that. The issue that businesses used to have is the computer said no. Now what we're finding is with the peer-to-peer lenders, it is all fintech, it's based on financial analysis. But it's not necessarily real-time financial analysis. So sometimes the computer says yes. For example, if a business has posted an excellent profit the year before, but what might have happened is the business's profits might have dipped, and the business facilities are actually being made. That decision is made on the last year. So actually, it can be the wrong decision for the business, because it doesn't necessarily take into consideration all the risks that we would look at when we're looking at a business and how it's going. So whilst if you're wanting a very short-term 3 to 5 day answer for a very quick fix, it's okay. If you are looking to grow your business, I wouldn't suggest using a peer-to-peer lender for that basis.
For that reason. Now, the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund was launched in February of last year. I think I remember going along to the Cumbrian launch in Penrith. It's been going then for about 18 months. What's the uptake been like?
Well, I've got to say it's been a bit of a slow start, but we're actually starting to see in the last couple of months that we are actually being approached for some larger investments, which is really good. We've just completed this month a 350,000 investment to a Cumbrian business that manufactures. And myself and my colleague have got a couple of deals that we're progressing. So the uptake was slow, but we are starting to see more referrals. But what I would say is there's still a lot of people out there that don't know about our fund and haven't approached us. And the earlier they come to us, the better, because with our funding, obviously we've got a certain time scale to let the money out, and the longer they've got to repay, the cheaper it is for them in the long term. When I say cheaper, I don't mean in the cost, but I mean in they can spread their payments. Where if a lot of people come at the last minute and we've only got a short term, then therefore sometimes it can be quite difficult to get the funds out. So basically, the more people that we've got, the better.
And are you competitive both in terms of interest rate and also in terms of repayment term as well? Is that flexible? Is there an upper limit on?
Right. With regard to our interest rates, obviously we are lending in an unsecured market, so you can't compare our borrowing to, say, the bank with the security there, because obviously there isn't any security there. That's why they've come to us. I think we're very competitive in lots of markets in the fact that we are offering an unsecured rate. With regard to payment flexibility, as I mentioned to you, at the moment, because our funding was put in for 5 years, but we've got an 8-year repayment term, we can still do loans effectively for 6 years. But as each year goes down, that will get shorter and shorter. So as I was explaining, it's not necessarily cheaper, but it means that the payments are spread out for a shorter time. So again, the quicker people come, they can do. One of the beauties that we've got, and I do think this makes us stand out, is we have got the option of building an interest-only period. If a business is particularly scaling up and is spending lots of money, but they're not going to see the benefit of that contract for, say, 3 to 6 months.
It can help with cash flow.
It can help with their cash flow until the money started to come on, then we'll swap to repayment. And we have a lot of flexibility on what we set. So there's no guidelines that says we have to do X term for X. Our credit policy is a case of let's look at each proposition in its own merits and make a recommendation to the business.
So where can businesses find out more about the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund?
Well, what I would say is if they emailed me, I can give them lots of information about the Northern Powerhouse Fund, and my email is maria.ramsdale@fwcapital.co.uk. So I can supply them lots of information about the Northern Powerhouse Fund, and obviously have a conversation if that's needed.
Great. Thanks very much for your time, Maria.
Thank you very much.